All right.
We are talking this week about a subject that Andy knows far more intimately than I do, meaning he has been on I would say, the inside of the DEI industrial complex, having worked and trained within it, whereas I certainly come at this subject as a curious amateur pundit, having absorbed think pieces and downloaded and read training materials and really first even heard about the acronym as well as the what it represents, what DEI actually is. First, as from a critical lens, first from people being like, "This is taking over corporate America, and it's a huge problem." Kind of similar to how I first found out about critical race theory, and actually the two of them being intertwined ideologically. Um, so I'm going to let you certainly take the lead and jump us into uh, our question today. Do we have it formulated? Is DEI dying? Is DEI DEAD? Is that catchy? I feel like that's catchy, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I was going with the is DEI dead, but I like how
Yeah,
you
yeah,
said it. Let's go with that. Is
yeah.
DEI
Has DEI DIED? Whoa, because I think that'll look cute. Because I think the answer for there is no, and then that's somewhat easier, but then we can still have a realm to explore it in.
yeah, functionally, obviously it still exists.
Yeah,
It's
but you
like
know
it's like
how.
we're spelling it. It's like we don't want a child to know what we're talking about or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Which we don't. Honestly, I don't want kids to know about DEI. I want them to have no exposure to it at all. I feel like this is grown folks stuff. This is, hey kids, don't worry about it. Why don't you just go be kind? We're cleaning up our messes. You go make your own messes.
having just had the first version of the talk with my stepdaughter
Oh yeah.
along with her
Me-
mother.
Meaning
And
about police, like the talk meaning like how to act when police pull you over.
the sex talk.
Birth. That used to be the talk, but now I feel like in common vernacular, when everyone says the talk, they mean the talk about how to act when police pull you over.
Even for white people?
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I think that's just that's the only place I hear the phrase the talk.
Huh.
Other than there used to be that CBS show that was like The View, that was called The Talk. But in general, that's how I. So it's happened now for like a decade where that's what the talk means. Because everyone has that talk, the talk about how to act when police pull you over and how to. I mean, I had it when I was probably 5 or 6, maybe,
Hmm.
of how to act when the police approach you and how to. One of the first lessons I ever learned about that talk was don't run.
Yeah.
Whatever, when the police come around, don't run because you look immediately, you're guilty, and since they are almost predator minded, they will treat you as prey. That was how
Hmm.
my that was the first version of my talk. But you mean what I used to think of as the talk, which is yeah, the birds and the bees, what sex is. So you just launched into that this week.
Yeah. Or that was a week or two ago, but there was a moment, I thought it went fairly well as those things can. But there was a moment, I think I was actually walking her back from, I don't know, the playground or something. She she just said, I think I want to just be a kid for a while.
Yeah,
And I was like, cool, works for me.
that's a good. I think it's a
Go
good
ahead.
instinct. I think it's a good instinct, and I think in some ways our entire struggle with DEI has to do with us as adults uh, taking too long to say, I don't want to be a kid anymore. That's part of
Uh,
that's part of my theory, both
I
as a nation and as individuals, based on who has been involved with DEI. I was like, shouldn't you have had these conversations when you were 12 years old? Like, or actually even the project you're in or whatever, where it's like a woman sort of confronting systemic inequality and being like, oh man, I've never really looked at this. And she's like 70 years old or however old she is. I don't know how old she is. If I just made her older, I apologize.
Oh, she's
Uh,
76. It's
oh, there
it's
you go.
true. That's why it's
Okay.
literally
Yeah.
called late love. It's like I'm late.
Yeah. Yeah. So whereas for me, that was like probably when I was like 12 or 13. It's when I got deep into it. Started reading, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X, read the 3 or 4 books about him, uh, and then started reading alternate history books and, got like deep into it. And listen, there was no internet, kids. So this was at the library. I did my best. It's amazing to think about the resources one can endeavor upon now. I still am what is it, flabbergasted at how much you can pursue. But for me, that was like 12 or 13. So it's funny to me for someone to be like 60 years later, be like, I'm going to be a grown up about this right now. Let's take a look at it.
No, I that's something we vehemently agree on. I don't
Yeah.
like the violent agreement thing. It's like, what is it about?
Yeah. 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 Violently agree. I adamantly, aggressively agree. Yes.
But yeah, I mean, one of the notable examples for me was a program called Fire and Water, and it's all about a rite of passage. And the argument is
Mm.
that's something a lot of us, maybe arguably in the West especially, don't have, as we've been
Yeah.
separated from our core indigenous cultures, or say what you will. And that's true for me anyway. I'll just speak for myself. It's like, wow, gosh, what did I have? A couple graduations. I think certain religious cultures seem to hold that. I mean, Judaism comes to mind more obviously. Maybe
Yeah.
that's true for Christianity. But anyway, whatever it is, the whole idea of growing the hell up and being able to have mature discussions about these things, and that
Yeah.
is we. I think maybe that's a core theme we often dance around, is just
Yeah.
how can we have real, grown up, mature conversations about these, and not just sort of drift back into what I guess we both hold as a less mature standpoint of just othering and sort of binary reasoning, and I don't know, maybe an overemphasis on our emotional state
Sure.
versus
Sure. Yeah.
versus
Or apathy. Yeah.
or apathy. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think it's intended to be pursued at a much younger age, personally, in that uh, being much more close to play-based learning,
Hmm.
uh, I think is vital and essential. And I think one of the reasons why people of our whole country is arguing about DEI is because a lot of people are late to it and they forget how to be curious and how to be playful and how to even tragedy. I mean, this is something I inherited culturally from being Irish, uh, that even tragedy is, you're meant to write funny songs about it. You can write sad poems too, but you can laugh. You can laugh about a potato famine. You can laugh about death. You can laugh about homicide. You can laugh about everything. Like it's all now laughter is at one edge of play, but that spirit of play is kind of necessary to solve even very serious problems, or else it's very difficult, especially for grown-ups, I think, not to be like, this is the only way, this way and just this way, you know.
Yeah.
So let's be playful here today on this episode of Totally Classic, with myself, Brendan McNamara.
And myself, Andy Swindler. That is a good framing, I think. I don't know. Talking about maturity is at least one slight notch away from building hierarchies and being better than and all that fun stuff. But I do
Yeah,
think
yeah.
there's something in that framing, even though nobody would ever collectively agree upon such a thing, that is
No,
relevant
yeah.
here.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We
And
might be able to find it. Yeah. And it has to be in some way like there have to be markers culturally. I mean, just like there are for speed or whatever. You know what I mean? I mean, but it's more like using something like strongest. Who's the strongest? You're like, well, does that mean who can lift the most weight? Who can lift the most weight for the longest time? Who can run the farthest without tiring? It's probably more in that realm where you're like, there are objective standards, but there are a series of there are a series of angles to even appraise those ones about what
yeah,
what what maturely facing the world is. And for me, it's new. It's I'm again, I just started calling myself a man 6 years ago, so it's a new adulthood. Embracing it, the embracing of adulthood is a new thing for me.
me too. I mean, I would say in some ways, the last 10 years, but really, I'd say more earnestly, the last like 6 years, the Mankind Project is built around that whole idea, especially for men, of like
Yeah.
through a rite of passage. And then, like I said, this other program, Fire and Water. But anyway, back to DEI. So what
Yep.
the heck are we talking about? Well, if you don't know,
Yes.
um, it is funny. I often find myself still spelling out the very long acronym in words if I think there's any chance somebody might not know. And then and sometimes I'm confident, like they must know, and I'll say DEI, and they're like, "What are you talking about?" So clearly, not everybody knows, and even in the industry, not everybody agrees on the acronym. Not everybody agrees what it means, and even if they say they agree what it means, not everybody's doing the same kind of work by any stretch. So, yeah,
Yeah.
welcome to the Wild Wild West, which is probably on the woke naughty list. We'll look that up later. Um, DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. Sometimes you'll hear people pronounce it DENI, like pronouncing the ampersand, which
Oh,
drives me nuts because it sounds like DENI, like there's an N
yeah.
in the middle of it.
Yeah.
Like,
And what does that stand for?
you've
Yeah.
already lost me.
Yeah.
So anywho, once upon a time in my startup Feel Real, we were noodling with the idea that at its best, DEI is what we call social justice at work. We both just read an article where she sort of nested DEI inside social justice, which if that's true, that would explain a lot of why and how it's politicized, certainly.
Yes.
But so these are some definitions I came up with in a workshop 5 years ago that I think are still reasonable, at least starting points.
Yeah.
Diversity being a variance in the population.
Hmm.
It's really it,
Yep.
right?
That's it.
It's pretty
Yeah. Yep.
a
Sounds right to
natural
me.
concept. That seems to be how nature tends to mix up things.
Yeah.
Uh, used to call it a melting pot. I've heard recently it's like, wow, we don't like the melting pot because that, the identities are lost in there. And so now it's called a tossed salad. And I'm like, yeah, I like the
I don't,
analogy, but
I,
that brings up all sorts of other things that I don't know if I
yeah.
can.
Yep.
But
Prison sexual practices.
uh, equity, again, my definition, modifying systems to redistribute power and access since people have different starting points.
Whoa, that one's so much more complicated.
Very complicated. And I
I
will,
think
this is,
there's got to be a simpler version of that. This is because equity is one of the biggest arguments about what even equity means, whether it means so diversity is variance, right? Simply,
yeah.
that's great. Equity is
Okay, here,
equal something. Either, and this is what everyone argues about, all right? Is it equal opportunity or is it equal outcome?
right. So,
Yeah.
so here's a quick search. The quality
Yeah.
of being fair and impartial comes up
Mm-hmm.
quickly in a
Yep.
search.
Yep.
Maybe that's less biased out of the gate.
I think that seems fair. Yeah. Equity would mean it's got to be equal something.
You're saying that's an equitable definition?
It's a equivalent something. I would say equivalent blank actually in terms of the DEI framework. But
And this is,
because I would say generally in terms of if we're talking well, let's actually no, let's keep going. Let's finish the
right.
terms, then we'll go back to what DEI is. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and to
Yeah.
me, equity is the area I personally spend the least time in because
Yeah.
I think there's a real expertise and a real chance of causing harm. I mean, when you're really twisting
Yeah.
the bolts on the systems and policies and laws, and
Yeah.
you take you twist the wrong bolt in the wrong direction, and all of a sudden you're actually causing more harm than you're solving. So in a way, I don't necessarily trust myself. That's not my kind of area of expertise. I focus personally more on the I, inclusion.
Mm-hmm.
When different perspectives are welcomed and celebrated in order to nurture belonging,
Mm-hmm.
lots of people will add a B, which I support, and the last firm I've been hanging out with does DEIB,
Well, then how would
to actually separate belonging. Yeah.
got it. Well, how would a lot so then inclusion, meaning inclusion just means you're part of it. And then belonging means you feel like you're part of it? Or how would those, yeah, because I've noticed that too, the DEIB. I've seen it less, but I've seen it. Um, so inclusion would just mean like equal diversity would mean like a whole bunch of different. Equity means same amounts of something. Inclusion means you're in. And then belonging would be like, yeah, if they were differentiated, then would they take on different meanings? Is
I
my
think
question.
the idea is inclusion, even the sound of the word is like I'm including you in my thing. Like it's my party
Yeah.
and and I want you to feel included here, but it's still my party.
Yeah.
And I think the idea with belonging is like, oh, Oh, and now it's my party too. Like
Got it. So,
I'm not just included in your party, but it's actually my party too.
got it. So would you throw out? Then would it make more sense to throw I out if you used in belonging? Because belonging really encompasses inclusion then. So it
I
would be
think,
DEB, but
I,
Deb just doesn't sound good.
yeah, Deb is probably right up there with Karen in terms of,
Yeah, it's not a, it just doesn't, it doesn't invoke the same ideology.
yeah. There's a, I think you're onto something there. We could talk about another time.
Yeah.
One I personally like, I know we're both Star Wars fans, Jedi. Some people go with Jedi,
Oh,
but there's
okay. Yep.
whole articles about why that's problematic and everything's problematic is
Yes.
is the bottom line.
Yes.
One of the challenges I have with equity, and I agree, it's the stickiest, it's the most complex, it's the one that's probably where the most good could be done and the most harm could be done. And
Yeah.
uh, one of the challenges I have, because before I really, I'd say more formally got into the DEI space in the last couple of years, um, but was doing my own work and hosting some workshops and things. Uh, Before that, I was coming at this through conscious capitalism and purpose
Mm.
and organizational, really kind of new paradigm, next generation organizational work, which often includes really rethinking how we even structure ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think it's surprising to me how few DEI practitioners I ever hear talking about different ways of organizing ourselves,
Hmm.
particularly away from hierarchies. And not to say all hierarchies are bad. Sometimes they're quite useful and necessary and even productive and nurturing.
Yeah.
But we default to them, and there are other ways to organize
Yeah.
ourselves. And that to me is kind of one of the most confounding things because I think a lot of DEI people are just trying to solve and make like incremental changes within structures that aren't ever going to um, have the best features of those different systems.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think as we're talking, I'm just looking ahead on the outline that like one of the important things to clarify is are we talking about the ideology of these terms or or DEI as is here it says the DEI industrial complex as it exists today, which may be synonymous with what people mean when they say DEI, which can be widely variant as well. But I'm trying to be centrist, and let's see if we can both be centrist in this moment. Like looking from the outside, like not involved with DEI organizations, and I'm not involved with organizations who are trying to fight DEI. It seems to me that DEI doesn't refer to diversity, equity, inclusion. It refers to a particular um, set of ideologies and solutions that address those issues. So DEI has become, and this isn't even just like named from the outside, right? Like the sort of like woke thing was kind of internal, external. This is more like critical race theory, where it was internally identified as DEI, and there does seem to be a semi-consistent message, framework, series of references and proofs that stretch probably not universally, but generally across the actual industrial complex, the actual enacting of such. But it's an idea that these things can be achieved through particular uh, vantages of understanding and pursuits of amelioration. As opposed to, I think sometimes this is a place of bad faith argument I've noticed online, is where people are like, "What? Do you have a problem with diversity?" And you're like, "Hold on a second. That's not right. That's a we're no one's talking about that. No one's talking like when you talk about critical race theory, no one is talking about being critical about race and theorizing. That you're literally talking about this foundational thing which calls itself DEI and how they think the world is structured and how they think these problems can be solved. So it does so in that case, I think you would have to, but this is we'll see if you agree with this. DEI has to be nested inside social justice, like as a much broader category. So where someone could say DEI is absolutely like opposite social justice. It's antithetical to social justice. But I think at its best, it's attempting to like accomplish things that are social justice goals. But it is still a framework. And I would suggest anti-DEI advocacy is also social justice. It's also they both are, which I think is what makes it so interesting. People who hate DEI and want to tear it apart want to do it for the purposes of greater social justice. And I hope in some ways I say that out loud to myself and to other people as like that's a good thing. I know that sounds bad. We're like, oh no, we're fighting on the inside. You're like, no, no, no. The goal for everyone that I've not seen this. I've seen accusations on both sides that there's nothing but racist intent behind all of DEI, and there's nothing but racist intent behind all anti-DEI advocacy. And that is, hey, if anyone says that, y'all run away from that person. Let them find their path elsewhere. That is not a that's not cogent. Just like the same, I do this with my kids, right? With my kids say, "Oh my gosh, you always do this." You'd be like, that's a lie. You're already lying. You're lying to yourself and to us. That happens with grown-ups too, folks. And it happens here. Whereas I think it's good because the goal actually is, I think DEI are actually as concepts are something that people who hate DEI and love DEI are both into. Like they're both like, these are good.
Yeah, and as we know, this show makes space for nuance.
Yeah.
Like it's like Pee-wee's Playhouse, what we say
Yeah.
nuance.
And we all scream, please, no, no.
Brendan's
Yep.
favorite word.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just to remind all of us, and I'll not say it again, but uh, because I'm tempted to say it's a young industry, but this raises 2 points. So if we go with the framing that it's a young industry,
Yeah.
even pointing to it as an industry is challenging because there's so many different flavors of it. There's so many different people practicing it.
Yeah.
They don't all agree. They don't, like we said, they don't use the same acronyms. They don't have the same practices. And so that's its own challenge.
Yeah. So I think in some ways we should talk about whatever, and you may know this better than me, whatever the majority is. Like, is there a 70 to 80% kind of function in this way? Because we know people like in terms of across corporate America, for example, or across academic corporate America, the nomenclature is similar, meaning they all call it the Office of DEI or whatever. So everyone has agreed to call it the same thing, which already suggests a union of ideology, as opposed to be like, no, I'm not part of that. I want this to be known as something else. Um, is there at least a majoritarian flow within the diverse application of DEI?
I think so. Just even hanging out in maybe the more casual sort of networking version of this, it
Yeah.
very much, I agree with you. It feels like a lot of people who are ideologically aligned. It is a lot of folks who I think want a better, more just world. All sorts of very
Yeah.
broad like aphorisms we could apply, which I
Yep.
sometimes am guilty of myself. Um, how we get there varies a bit. I think one of
Yep.
the challenges in the last few years, I've a number of practitioners, that I trust, that I think are the so-called good folks in this space,
Yeah.
doing more rigorous work. Maybe I'll put it that way. We're really challenged after George Floyd was murdered.
Or died of overdose. We don't. I truly don't know.
I know. I just setting you up for that. That's a
No,
whole
I
other
know.
episode.
Yeah,
But
yeah. Tell another episode. And again, I hold that
uh,
not as I've referred to him both as a murderer, murder victim, manslaughter victim, and a suicide. So I don't know. Is my
there you go.
answer.
After that it occurred, there was a huge upswing in requests
Yeah.
for DEI services. Companies, a lot of that I think was motivated by employees saying, hey, we got to do something. I don't know, many of us were locked down for whatever reason, and getting out and marching, I'm pretty confident was motivated as much by getting out of the house as it was actually giving a shit, but whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
It was
Well,
the
and then
summer,
yeah, yeah. And then people discovered that they were like all of a sudden they were not, they were able to get out without the social castigation that had taken place in previous gatherings. I thought was this is again when I started noticing the media bias was so prevalent, where I was like, wait a second, the like people who gathered together outside to do like gospel gatherings, singing songs and doing church outside. People were like, "You're murderers," and then people went outside to protest in cities where George Floyd did not live. And I was like, "Well, wait a second. Why are all the people out?" And they said if you went outside to gather to do whatever, then you were a murderer. So I found that fascinating. So my assumption is not that employee, but again, I don't know. You're in the middle of it. It's not that employees talked to anybody and said this is something that's important. I think it seems to me that educational institutions and corporations were getting ahead of it, seeing cancellations and condemnations and blah blah blah, and they were like, "How do we deal with this?" And we've been sending some materials back and forth that this has been one of the problems, is that people have what's it sort of pink ribboned it, just kind of like, cool, stick a pink ribbon on it. It shows we care about breast cancer. Stick a rainbow on it. It shows we care about queer people. Stick a BLM sticker on it, or let's have a DEI office, or let's hire a thing so then people won't come after us. I think people started using, I think, again, this is, but I was watching people do this with masks, right? Of like, you put this social talisman on, you hire a DEI person, and then that is like what's the word? It's like putting a thing in your window to say like, I'm with you, don't smash me up. But I'm slightly more cynical about social change.
Well, I think this feels relevant here. So one of the practitioners I admire and actually have spent the last year working with, Alita Miranda Wolf of Ethos, um, just actually published a book, The First Time DEI Manager. But this is from an interview she did recently. But I think this is really interesting how she points out there's a Pew Research Center report that the majority of American workers believe DEI is a good thing, though there's a significant divide among political lines. So 78% of Democratic and Democratic leaning workers agree on focusing at DEI at work as positive, compared with only 30% of Republicans and Republican leaning ones. So
Yeah.
it seems like there's a pretty clear political divide.
Yeah, about what it means, I think, is the huge thing. I don't even think it's really actually about, and this is the problem with all these. I love a Pew. Give me a Pew Research data all day long. I love it. However, you never get the good stuff, which is like how when people call me for polling, I ask a lot of questions. And I was like, what do you mean by that? And I have a feeling that just like they found this in the UK last year or whatever, the people were asked about like trans women or trans men, and most people didn't know. If you said trans woman, most people, the majority of people did not actually know what that was. Like whether that was, is a trans woman a woman who's a woman but now identifies as a man, or a man who now identifies as a woman. Like people
Right.
didn't know what these and I think with DEI, a lot of people, I would say the majority of people generally don't know what they're talking about. And so people, I think on both sides were like, on the left would assume, oh, it just means diversity, equity, inclusion. So then if you're opposed to that, you're one of those monsters. And then on the right, they're like, DEI, oh, that's that racist stuff. We don't want nothing to do with that. You know what I mean? And you're like, well, do you know what it is or how it's done? No, it's just racist stuff. Like, okay, great. Here we are with no one have. So I actually think most people, I'm going to dispute the poll results and say, I actually think most people have no idea what DEI is in terms of like, look, what it is as in terms of programming, right? And I didn't know until I started reading. I don't know, probably at this point read seven, eight, nine. You probably read more than me. I've read seven, eight, nine, 10 different like trainings, DEI trainings, workshop sort of slideshows, that sort of thing. I wouldn't have known what it was. And I would have been like, heck yeah, for the ideological, if it was just those three things, as opposed to like, oh no, a DEI department generally focuses on these things. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Yeah, and I mean, almost all of my work has been in corporate America, and
Okay.
and
Yeah, yeah.
even then, not huge corporations typically. Sometimes, yes, but some smaller firms and even nonprofits. Very, very little in the educational space. So one of the
Yeah.
things that kept coming up in some of the literature we were sharing was
Yeah.
this mandate that people, I think it was professors, but
Yes.
folks who are applying for teaching positions at universities
Yeah.
were to apply and provide a diversity, equity, and inclusion statement, like a DEI statement that went along
Yeah.
with their
Yeah.
application.
As like a necessary element of their application. Like
And
a not.
that,
Yeah.
yeah, like that seems far out for me. I'm like, I mean, I don't know. I've hired people in the last couple of years, and I'm like, I wouldn't ask them. I might talk to them about DEI, especially if it's a DEI position.
Yes. Yes. That would be
That
relevant.
seems relevant, but
Yeah.
to like make that part of like an application process, I understand why that's falling out of favor.
Yeah. I think that was alarming to a lot of folks. Yeah. Well, and that's what I mean, this is from the cynical view. When it became, I think it already existed. I think there's a problem with making affirmative action and DEI equivalent, which has already happened in the culture, and I probably can't change it. It's going to be this way now. I think that was incorrect. I don't think people should have done that. I was like, I think it's a completely separate thing. Um, and I do think it came about in the 2010s. I would even say it gained popularity after the sort of first run, the Trayvon Martin, et cetera, Eric Garner run of Black Lives Matter. I think first started being like, how do we deal with this? And how do we deal with the actual problem? And how do we contribute to a solution? And then how do we also stay away from the danger of people who are out to uh, harm our business, right? We see this with movement after movement, right? We're seeing it with Free Palestine right now, where it's like people are like, okay, boycott these companies. And I think people were just kind of looking to not get boycotted because they also saw like corporate America was taking weird hits. In terms of riots, like whatever, Target was the one that's getting cleaned out. And then uh, public public boycotts were being put in place, being like these people don't support us, or these people support this and that. These people donate to. I remember especially donate to like police causes or whatever, And so they're like, we have to get ahead of this. Um, and
Always,
corporations were canceling whatever Dr. Seuss books and Aunt Jemima, and you know what I mean. People were acting, I think, wacky, kind of wackadoo.
I
But I
spent
think,
time
yeah,
burning my Puma socks and shoes and underwear.
yeah, just done with you.
And it was the one on the BDS thing. I'm like, oh man, I have a lot of Puma shit. Oh, come on.
You're like, oh man, just do I just have to not buy new stuff?
Well, that's it. I'm absolutely asking that question. I'm like, well, it seems like intersecting with environmentalism. It seems odd to just, burn a bunch of stuff. But
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's where the rubber hit the road for a lot of people as to what DEI was, is that it became something you had to pledge fealty to. And I think that always bristles any libertarian instinct, which is, or the sort of I would say actually the freedom of religion principle that we like favor in the United States. Uh, it's just like, well, wait, don't tell me how to think. Don't tell me how to solve a problem, like a societal problem, especially a social problem that has nothing to do with my being a physics professor or whatever. You know what I mean? I was like, I'm not a professor of socioeconomic anything, you know? And so people, I think, got irritated that way as to like you're imposing your religion or ideology upon me. Now it's impossible not to impose some ideology on everything. So in some ways that's at least partially disingenuous, but I remember early on that seemed like a lot of people's early bristle was like, I don't, because that was one of the major things that I think got put in place. Um,
and I think that's one of the challenges we've talked probably more than once about, let's just say racism. I
yeah,
know it came up in our, we've talked probably endlessly about vocabulary,
yeah, yeah,
and racism, interpersonal or systemic, and um, that's, I think one of the challenges is, I do think there are systemic challenges in terms of laws that favor different populations differently. And if somebody is like, look, on the one hand, I agree with somebody if they're like, hey, I'm a good person, I treat people well. Like, isn't that just the way we should do it? I'm like, well,
yeah,
yeah, that's actually a valid argument.
yeah,
Other than that doesn't necessarily change systems or laws or policies in a corporation
yeah,
that are treating people unfairly. And
yeah,
so and I'm not a lawyer. And I think I said in the beginning, this is the part that I think is the trickiest and most complex. And I'm more the touchy-feely, like emotional. That's why I stay in the I and the B. And I'm like, hey, let's
yeah,
let's take good care of each other. So this much bigger and I think harder question of like, well, what does taking care of each other look like when we're
yeah,
talking
yeah,
about systems that govern how we share resources, how we function together, what we're allowed to do, what
yeah,
are the laws we follow. And I think two framings I'll offer. This whole show might just be like framing upon framing, but uh, one is harm reduction, which is not a
yeah,
new framing. That's something we often come back to because that's
yeah,
something we both agree is important.
yeah,
And the other, taking us back to Alita Miranda Wolf's interview briefly, she puts pay equity at the center of everything and saying, look, like it or not, we're in capitalism. I'm paraphrasing her a little bit, but she says, look, at the end of the day, yeah, people might care about purpose, but ultimately you're working for a paycheck. And, pay equity means compensating employees equally for the same or similar roles. And pay generally is the cornerstone of work. So, and then she goes on to say, DEI exists to protect workers made more vulnerable to discrimination, harassment, exploitation, and mistreatment, specifically because of the identities they hold. If we're going to do right by these workers, we have to look at what most impacts them, their wages. That last part was a direct quote.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think the hard part is that I think the presuppositions she's speaking on speak quite potently towards what DEI is and how it differentiates from other forms of pursuits, social justice pursuits. So, and I think, and sometimes to the framing's detriment, meaning you can create systems, but it's really always, we've talked about this too, it's always going to get down to the individual. It's going to, because that's literally what she's talking about. She's talking about you can only determine pay inequity by analyzing on an individual basis. If you did it purely on racial basis, you're not going to have a clear view of what the hell is going on. They're cultural phenomenon, meaning like are there cultural expectations as to acquiescence to how things are, and are there more argumentative cultures who therefore will argue for higher wages so then two people can have the same job and someone comes from a cultural context where it's negotiation. I'm just going to shout out because I have Persians in my family. Let's say a Persian person is involved. They are a negotiating culture, which means they are more likely to have a higher. And then there's the thing. So then if you're evaluating purely by race and purely by position alone and requirements of said position, this is the problem with, I think this is a DEI style framework and then this problem with that is that could be myopic in that it's not actually analyzing holistic. It's a non-holistic analysis. And I think actually the problems that most people have with the entire operation system, OS, has to do with the D and the E. I think once you're in, and you should belong. I think almost no one would have a problem with that. And if anyone was being discriminated internally based on their blackness, whiteness, Asianness, queerness, straightness, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anyone other than like a pure libertarian who wouldn't be full on board with going, let's eliminate that. But then that's the problem, right? In terms of pay equity, it's like, okay, well, you have two regional managers at the same corporation, right? They're both at Florida Orange Juice, and they're regional managers of similar size. You can never find exact size, but similar size, like territories. Analyzing them purely on a racial basis and assuming that the reason for if someone has a lower rate, let's say, and they're a black person, then it's like, well, it's because they're black. You can't assume that. You can't, I mean, again, this is like bad science. It's bad evaluation to assume. And that's, I think I would say one of the problems about why DEI is dying is that it's making an undue assumption that on an individual basis, that overall racial outcomes are relevant to every single person, or that relevant as an assumption rather even than just like a theory that needs to be proven. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I just know for myself, I mean, I think we've talked about this
Yeah.
In various ways. I find myself more and more challenged with any ideology that just creates a different system of hierarchy. And
yeah.
It's tricky because like I think you're probably out there encountering this more than I am, just because I have fairly little energy for it. But challenging some of the ways this ideology shows up, particularly words even like whiteness at this point.
Yeah.
The ideology would suggest that like that's a fact. Like that's the water we swim in.
Yeah.
And there are various ways I agree with that. And then there are various ways I think that that's so limiting as to be not only dysfunctional, but useless in terms of moving us forward. And,
Yeah.
let's just say, look, I personally, as a white man, agree that, my British ancestors were the primary colonizers that, slaughtered many, many folks and took these lands. We've had discussions about indigeneity and all sorts of things on the show. We don't have to go into all of it. But my challenge with that is, and I think this is sort of where you're coming from, is when we cast any group just as this one identity or this one box, it's very limiting and very challenging. And so as my
Yeah.
work moves more and more into like trauma and healing, I reject the idea that we just sort of set all white people aside and say, well, hey, look, they're all privileged. I mean, I happen to
Yep.
agree with generational wealth and systemic privilege and things in ways that I don't think Brendan entirely does. And yet I also feel like that setting them aside and saying, well, they're all privileged means we're also saying we're not gonna acknowledge or address any of their trauma. And at this point,
Yeah.
I'm pretty convinced we all face trauma in life, and not to
Yep.
equivocate, but also not to like throw out the idea. It's not like zero sum where like, oh, just because you have some privilege, you don't have any trauma, you don't need to heal that. Um, and I feel like that is the argument that's often being made.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Well, and I think that's why DEI is dying. So I guess in some ways, it is. It, I can't tell if it's dead. My answer is still I don't know if it's dead, and we just hasn't finished dying yet. But we've seen reductions. We've seen UNC college system, whatever, like just destroy the office and just move the money into public safety, um, which could still address many of the same issues, whatever. But I think that's one of the primary arguments against DEI generally is that essentially that it was racist, that it was just it tried to enact systemic racism with an upside down paradigm from what they evaluated the world as. So then it said you can make statements like that about this class of people, but you can't about this other people. So it said like, oh, these people are on the bottom. And then it says, let's flip it upside down. And so which made it so you then could and this is one of the problems with some of the articles we shared about in academia, where people started explicitly discussing people's race in giving them college applications, job entrance, all that sort of thing, and I think DEI did lead to that outcome, whether on purpose or if that's just kind of happened, I don't know. And that would have to be programmatically hypocritical because it seemed like DEI was being enacted in order to deal with that type of problem, where people explicitly were like, because you're white, you can get in. Like that would be, I think that would be bad. Again, in my libertarian side said, whatever, I guess businesses can kind of do what they want. But at the same time, I was like, that's not morally correct to just go, oh, your whiteness means you should be hired. And I think that's happened in the past explicitly. And that would be an example of, especially people putting things in place where entrants are given priority by being white. That would be a systemic racist application. So then if you apply that to any race, you're doing the same thing just for different people, which then undermines the fact that you think it was wrong to be done in the first place, which says, why are you even doing this? Like, why did we even, it sort of, it unravels the whole operation as
Which is closer
opposed,
to the affirmative action, right? With the idea that,
yeah.
oh, hey, let's lift up this group of marginalized folks and give them an extra boost.
Yeah.
But
But then doing it, but even affirmative action, this is kind of why it fell. They did it in a racist way. Because ultimately you can't, anytime you prioritize any race over another, that's a racist application. It's racist no matter who you do it to. And if you call it whatever, and then you can't have things like whiteness exist with a whole bunch of characteristics, many of which are negative. And then you have to have like blackness or Asianness or Jewishness. And those have to have a bunch of things around too, or else again, we're not pursuing equity. We're throwing equity out the window. So I think that's been the second biggest hamstring. I think the first biggest hamstring is more internal as to what's killed DEI is the fact that most people who engaged in it or hired people to do it didn't believe in it in the
yeah,
first place. So I think it's just they just did it out of fear or this sort of sense of compulsory, especially again during 2020, is I think the the boom in terms of DEI jobs was astronomical. And it was at the same time that people were acting phenomenally tribalistic about so many things. And everyone was so afraid that other people were going to get mad at them about how they dealt with things, which is a reasonable fear because of course it harmed my life, but it's not a reasonable fear morally to really hold that as a concern. So I think that was the biggest. I think the second biggest really though is this problem that like, how do you, and or it's a great question. How do you do this? How do you try to adjust these things? Are they, and then this is the bigger question, are they adjustable? Like, can we have more equitable outcomes once if we just zoom out and analyze everything by race in a non-holistic fashion? Could those outcomes be better? Or by gender? Like, could they? Or are they unsolvable problems? And the ideologue in me, or the idealistic ideologue in me, wants them to be solvable. And I think that's something people again who love DEI or hate DEI share. They're like, no, I think we can figure this out. I think we can fix it.
There you go. And that's what I hold on to. And I think if we could have more, as we said in the beginning, more mature dialogues about whether, how this is even functioning.
Yeah.
I think part of what happened in 2020 is you had this kind of gold rush and people came in
Yeah.
who had no idea. And it's tricky, right? Because on the one hand, you're like, well, what standards are we even holding, as we discussed? It's like, well,
Yeah, I don't know.
there are no standards. There are a handful of DEI certifications, like Georgetown stands out. I know a couple of folks who have gone through that program. But that's, I mean, my God, what, three, I don't know, less than 10 programs,
Yeah,
uh,
yeah.
fewer than 10, uh, that I know of, that, compared to the rest of the market is by no means uh, a standard. And so you had all these people come in. I was actually recently talking to our buddy Scott from college, who's a realtor, and he was saying the same thing is happening in real estate. And there's a bit of uh,
Mm.
a thinning right now of the crowd, and the folks who, and I think it's similar in some ways. I mean, real estate's a little different because at least there you have to actually pass some kind of exam, and there is some kind
Just
of
this, just for the state or whatever. Yeah.
actual like legal, yeah, like state standard.
Yeah.
But I don't think that's too huge of a barrier for a lot of folks. But it causes a kind of a disruption and a reduction in credibility
Yeah.
for, let's say, the good operators, uh, that may be similar in DEI. And I would define the good operators in this moment by the folks who are willing to actually address the question you just posed. How is this possible? Can we do this? Can we actually create data sets that validate what is solvable, what is not? I might find myself saying, well, diversity is the hardest thing to solve. And
Mm.
it's true in the sense that you're talking about changing population. So let's go back to a corporate standpoint,
Yeah.
it's like, well, these are people's jobs. What are you gonna do? Fire half the population just so you can make it more diverse? Well, that's not really
Yeah.
the best outcome.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
but people often get stuck at that part and just throw their hands up and they're like, well, and this happens at like conferences a lot. They're like, well, I don't know, like we couldn't, only white people are speaking because that's all we could find. And often it is also mixed in with laziness of just not being willing to go beyond
Yeah.
our networks and go beyond the people we know and go beyond our existing communities. And so I think it's a bit of both and there.
Yeah. Well, and we saw, I'm just quoting from a Bloomberg article, uh, corporate America promised to hire a lot more people of color. It actually did. The year after Black Lives Matter protests, the S&P 100 added, and this is in 2020, added more than 300,000 jobs. 94% went to people of color. Now, so outcomes occurred. Some people, and I think one of the things that I thought was the death knell of DEI was when Charlemagne the God was on the Daily Show and did a whole monologue about DEI uh, being anti-DEI, while still again making a lot of terrible arguments, but essentially because it wasn't working. Now, in some ways, it has worked, and I think what a lot of people um, immediately you have to take logical issue is this with this is okay. Oh, that seems effective. Wait, 94%? That's that's uh that's not proportionate. That's not proportionate to our populace. So is that how disproportionate it was? Like it had to hire 94% of non-white people to get it more proportionate. And then I find this lazy. that people who are anti-DEI have just coined it, and they're like, oh, it means didn't earn it. I don't think that's helpful. I know that you think it's cute and people are fighting. Listen, a lot of people are effective with completely weak arguments, and I think that's a weak framing personally. So maybe they're just trying to be effective. But that statistic alone, A, says stuff happened. Hey, that could be good. But then you're like, oh, well, wait, how did that happen? Like, did that happen in a racist fashion? Like, were people uh, deliberately kept out because of their like identity on a basis of any identity? And if they were, that to me seems like the thing we all should want to solve. Like, I don't care really how anything ends up personally. Um, I don't want anyone discriminated against or for based on their their occupation of any identity group, because I feel like that's the problem that created this problem, was people prioritizing people because they were um, of European ancestry or even very specific European ancestry for quite some time in our country. So then if you're going to use the tool that you said was the bad tool that created the problem, you don't want to use that same tool of prioritizing anyone because their membership in an identity category. And so if 94%, that seems disproportionate again. So it sounds like, did we just try to solve the problem by doing the problem? And that, which leads me to the sort of second, I think the second biggest problem with DEI, which is that it is functionally racist most of the time, operationally. Like that seems to be, and I don't even mean that, I think kind of across the board, that it says, because it says you have to factor in this thing. And eventually you say factor it in, okay, fine. But then eventually you do have to prioritize it if you want an outcome. Like you have to then go, if you got these two equally qualified candidates, if you prioritize one because they're white, that's crummy. That's exactly what we've condemned for decades. If you prioritize them because they're black, that's crummy. That's because it's the same problem.
And I've been in those conversations, which
Yeah.
legally we cannot admit. Um, but
Yeah.
it's
I've
true.
done,
And it's like worse if you're in the
I've done
DEI
it.
industry. You're like, well, wait a minute, our optics matter here. And all of a sudden there's this really
Yeah.
fucked up pressure to like, and
Yeah.
look, I'm a straight white dude and doing this stuff in DEI. I get it. But it's also like it validates your point. Like we can't be having this conversation. Like this is
Yeah,
not.
we can't say, can we say this? Is this okay? I've done it. I've done it in terms of casting on things. Well, I've had that conversation where we're like, but we've done it completely naked. We're like, oh, because people like that. They think it means something. And you're like, okay, well, yeah, if you I've absolutely engaged in what would functionally be virtue signaling. And then at some point we go, let's prioritize that in terms of who we invite to the casting. Really doesn't, and then you try to go, we have to throw it out when we're actually casting though. We have to throw it out. I think I can prioritize it in terms of invite, but not in terms of inclusion. Like
Yeah, I mean, I
equality
think,
of opportunity.
I mean, if this is the message that these waters are infested with, I've bought into the idea that, well, let's do this for now.
Yeah, yeah,
We need to correct something,
yeah,
and then at some point we will like magically know that we've like made it
yeah, yeah,
can shift. And I've become much more skeptical of that idea. And so that's the critical difference I hear you saying is like, let's always be focused on the individual and the impact on these individuals
yeah,
and how we're sort of judging individuals, if it's a hiring or whatever, versus the idea that we're playing God and imagining that we can
yeah,
control the outcomes of an incredibly complex system.
yeah. I mean, it's at some point force outcomes, which then is like, but that's what we said was bad. Unless again, we're taking for me, it hinges on a moral component because it has to, because it's a moral question or a philosophical, ethical question that things should somehow be representative of like general populations. That's not a there's nothing just like purely utilitarian about that. That's a moral ethical that's a moral ethical evaluation of how we treat other human beings, which I agree with. I agree that it's bad. Like, I agree it's bad and we shouldn't do it. But then this leads to, though, if you're doing it for a certain amount of time, then at some point are you sacrificing merit, which I think is the third biggest like reason that DEI has suffered death. Um, is that at some point then to make those decisions, you do have to go against merit, like merit-based awarding of a position. Now, within a certain range of merit, I actually don't think it matters. I think there are ranges of merit where it would start to be influential, as opposed to like, you're like, this person might be 18% better, but they're white or whatever, so let's not hire them because 18%, who cares? Um, so I can understand how that becomes a slippery slope or whatever, but then this becomes the issue of why it might be suffering. Is because merit, again, this is a Western idea that like merit is like what we reward. We reward hard work or outcome or output or acumen or whatever. And we believe individually that is what's baked in and helps us rise. And we don't like anything that isn't merit based. But I think everyone actually kind of agree on both sides actually agrees with this. We don't like things when we want everyone, and that's what our anger was. We're like this, some of this disproportionateness is multivariate, but at least some of it in a lot of circumstances is because merit was not the primary or the what's the word? The sort of the tip of the spear in terms of how we were making these decisions. We were making them based on European ancestry or whatever.
Right. And then you start to extrapolate much harder things to prove like, well, this person didn't perform as well because they didn't have access to the same education or because they were doing twice as much work just to, show up or, things that I think I might even argue some of those, but how do you apply that in the context of merit for this
Yeah.
job, for this moment, for these two
Yeah.
candidates?
Yeah.
Much difficult. One thing, I don't need to wrap, but I hold this, and I think a lot of folks do. Maybe this is a bit idealistic or even naive, but this idea that, yeah, these are just like moral principles,
Yeah.
like that
Yeah.
ought to just be baked in or integrated.
Yeah.
And I believe that. I'm like, a lot of DEI practitioners would suggest the same. Like, you know what, this shouldn't be a separate department. This shouldn't be just one person. I mean, that's what
Yeah.
happens. Sadly, that's one of the reasons, even with the best intentions and very talented people, it's like a company hires like one person is like, okay, great. It's 500 people in the company. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
great. We have one person. Now let's do DEI.
Yeah. Yeah.
I've worked with these folks and I talk to them and it's very, very challenging. They're often underfunded. That's an even better scenario than what also happens where it's like somebody's side job. Like, oh, you've got a full-time job. And,
Yeah.
oh,
They've
you're
added
black
to
or
it.
you really give a shit about people. Great. You do the DEI thing. It's like,
Yeah.
no. Um, and HR has gotten really weird. You'd think, gosh, shouldn't this be an HR thing? And it's like, well, maybe, but HR is mostly about compliance these days. And
Yeah.
it's not necessarily about people in that sense, not the touchy-feely stuff. So yeah.
Yeah. It becomes hard. Well, then to land it, is there an easy, like in a less than 5 minutes, how do we fix it instead of let it die?
I just come back to having better conversations about it
Yeah.
on let's say both sides to simplify it. Like let's not the DI folks not like agree that there's an ideology here that
Yeah.
isn't all just rooted in 100% fact and reason
Yeah.
and play with that and explore that and own that. And then folks who are against it realize that it's not all evil and it's
Yeah.
been entangled with political drama and some genuine bad actors and harm. And let's just actually look at that and have a real conversation about that. Wouldn't
Yeah.
that be amazing?
That would be amazing. That's my hope for the future too. Yeah, I think for anyone who disagrees on the application of how social justice can be accomplished, meaning let unjust things cease, I think is really most centrally the focus, at least in terms of my critical mind, and I think most human minds functions. Um, and maybe that's negative, but I do think that's mostly what we do. You want injustice to cease in all places, as opposed to let's have an abundance of new justice, which is we want all the injustice to end. The new injustice, the old injustice. Um, and I think that, yeah, my biggest solution, jumping on back of yours, is just for people who want to destroy DEI, Let's just stop calling everybody involved as racist. Let's find the parts that aren't. And find the parts that aren't. Let's figure them out. Let's do surgery instead of using a bomb. And then likewise, people who are pro DEI to stop referring to people trying to dismantle it as though it's purely racist, that it's just a racist thing. Because I see that on both sides. And I think it's the least helpful. We've been through it ourselves, right? We did a whole episode kind of on someone having about Claudine Gay, but it was like, this is just racism. And you're just like, well, there's almost no way that's true. For both people do it. They're like DEI is it's just racism by a new name. And the people are like anti-DEI is just racism under a new name. I think that's my best starter package for solution on how we can actually focus on why can't we, since there's all these offices already in place and money in place, can't we transform it to be about the principles that we actually agree upon?
Right
That's
on.
my hope.
So it has DEI, DIED. I'm going to go with no, but it might be on an iron lung. And I have a feeling it will emerge as always under some new banner.
Yeah.
Future.
Yeah. So I'm a yes/no. And then I think it has died. But my hope is that it can be piecemeal, it can be resurrected like RoboCop.
Right. Well, thank you for having this very rigorous and open dialogue. I love you.
Thank you. I love you.
Take care.